Our gospel comes to us from Luke, the 13th chapter. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox from me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I have desired to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you. And I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. I'd like to invite our children forward. Come and sit up here. And can I ask my usher if he would provide 2 extra bulletins for our acolytes who were hoping to have some bulletins up at the front and follow along? Okay, come on forward, guys. This is a very unusual children's sermon that we're getting this Sunday, so you're going to want to be a part of this. I thought you had a whipped cream, Ember. What is that? Thanks. Okay. All right. This is the one and only time that you're ever going to get this from your pastor. Today, I'm going to show you how to throw a punch. I know. We're doing that. We're doing it today. Here's the deal. Today's lessons have all been about violence. They've been about violent things happening, about people hurting other people, about people threatening to hurt Jesus. And so today we're going to have to talk about violence. And I want to teach you one punch. This is a very special kind of punch. Everyone stand up. You can leave your bulletins there. Everyone stand up. First thing we got to do is you got to get in your stance. So it's not a hook. Good, Thomas. But we're going to, in our stance like this is the wrong stance because people can hit me real easily. We want to stand with our side to the person who we're fighting. Okay? And then when you're doing this, you got to have at least one hand up. This would be Philly shell, right? You can kind of block with your shoulder if you want this, but even better is both hands up, kind of so you can protect your head. And the punch that we're going to throw is with this hand. It's your front hand, and it's called a jab. Okay? So throw. You know this, Thomas? Okay. So let's give some space so that everyone can do this. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to let you guys hit me in the hand so that we can see how this goes. So throwing a jab, there's a number of ways you can do this, but you're just going to go from this elbow out. Very simple, right? Out. Just with one hand. All right. Can you throw me a jab, hit me in the hand? That's the wrong hand. That's the back. With this front hand. Front hand. Good. Ryan, front hand. With your front hand, hit it. You can hit me. It's fine. Nice. Good. Real good. Evelyn? That's a backhand. You're trying to do damage with that. Just the front hand. Yeah, careful. There you go. Very good. Jackson. Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay. Amber, I knew you were going to be too kind for this. I just knew it. I knew it. Okay. You want to do one? Tiffany, you want to give me this jab? Kara? No, she's been waiting on this. Front hand. Yep. Were you a southpaw? Yeah, that was. Jeez. Okay. So the thing about a jab is that with a jab, you're not trying to hurt anyone. In all honesty, a jab is usually thrown in boxing for a couple reasons. One is timing. So you just sort of get the other person like expecting, and then you go off time. Another reason is distance, because you know how long your hand is, so you know how far away they are. You can even throw, and I threw it from here like this, you can even throw it with your shoulder down to get some distance from somebody. And you just sort of keep them away. I had a friend of mine who got jumped in Hartford, and he used a jab to keep from getting beat up. He just instinctively, he was on the phone, he just threw a jab, and the guy ran away. It was that easy. And that solved this problem. Okay, we can have a seat now. So I just taught you some violence. I just taught you how to do some violence. I really hope you never use it, right? Never, even to have to protect yourself, I hope that you never have to do that. There's an old spiritual song that I really like, and it goes, "Gonna lay me my burdens down, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside, gonna lay me my burdens down, down by the riverside and study in war no more. Think about what it means to never have to even study violence, to never have to even know what violence is or war. That means that you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable position, right? We would all have to agree, all of it, all creation would have to agree that we're not going to be violent ever again. I have a hard time sometimes even imagining what that world is going to be like or look like, but God promises us that that's what God's kingdom is going to be, and that we are all going to be in a world where we don't even study violence anymore. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know that something about it is what Jesus did, and that's going to be what we hear about in our sermon today. So thanks for doing that for me. We are all children of God. Remember that. Don't do any violence. No hitting. That was the only time in church ever, okay? All right, stand up. If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am, if anybody asks you who I am, tell them I'm a child of God. Would you join me in prayer? O Lord, may the meditations of my heart and the words of my mouth be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. I have a bad habit as a presenter and as a preacher to get lost in the preamble. I think about all the things I want to say before I say the things, and I've got to warn you right away, this sermon is going to fall victim to that right out the gates. But what I did to help with that is that I turned the children's sermon into all you need to know about where we're headed today. So the first part of the preamble that I have to say is we're going to talk about politics. And I'm not going to talk about contemporary politics or politics as it is now, but I am going to talk about politics as an ideological construct, as something that we have. We have politics. We have ways of organizing our systems of belief into categories for our life in the political realm, and Christianity has something to do with it. I know this sounds like an uncontentious thing, but sometimes people get it wrapped up in their heads that Christianity and the life together, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer would call it, the life together as a polis, as a political unit, they're together. If you were to look at the bibliography for this sermon, one of the names on there is a guy named John Howard Yoder, and Yoder calls himself a Christian anarchist. And the Christian comes first because it influences how he thinks about his pretty out there political theory of anarchism. And for instance, you might also find, if you travel to Germany, on the ballot there is a party called the CDU. They're a center-right party, which would be even further to the left than the Democrats in this country, because that's the way politics work there. But the C in CDU stands for Christian. And you don't have to be a Christian to vote for the CDU. You could just be a center-right person. But the C informs what they do. And the CDU, for instance, was one of the parties that voted to send Leopard battle tanks to Ukraine. So Christianity, this is preamble part 2, can lead you to some very, very different points of view about political violence. You can be a Christian anarchist, you can be a Christian Democrat, and you can come up with different answers about what the state is supposed to do with violence. Preamble part 4, what are we on already now? See, already I'm lost in the preamble. I told you I'm bad at this. The thing is to say that today we're going to be talking about violence. We're going to be talking about violence in terms of politics. Usually when people say, hey, what's your political party's platform and what's part of it, violence is not mentioned, but it's in there. Every political vision that has ever been cast has something to say about what is legitimate violence, if any, and when is it used, when is it inappropriate, and when is it valid. This is just, unfortunately, part of the pattern. Okay, I think we're finally ready. Herod. You just heard Herod talk. Herod is not the Herod that you're thinking of. I hope anyway. Maybe some of you know this. That Herod died. That Herod that you're thinking of from back in Christmas time died. In fact, the very reason that Herod died was why Jesus was coming back into the Holy Land and able to re-enter. This Herod is part of the family of Herods that are now going to be rulers over Jerusalem, over Palestine. Now, the one thing that connects the Herod family is their political view on violence. They're pro. They are a pro-violence party. Herod, if you remember from the Christmas story, is famous for trying to kill children. This is, generally speaking, something that a pro-violence political ideology would endorse, but not any others. And here we hear from the Pharisees, no less, themselves, no huge fans of Jesus, that Herod's intending to do the same to the adult Jesus now. So let's do a little visualization for me here. If we're going to put Herod somewhere on a plot, we have to know what this plot is, this political plot. Sometimes it's been talked about as a compass, other times a quadrant system, but I'm going to talk about it as a clock. Let's talk about the extremes of political ideologies and where they would fit on two different intersecting things. One is, how acceptable is the use of violence in establishing their politics? And the second thing is, how natural do they believe hierarchies to be? This is kind of the core of what forms usually a political ideology. So at high noon, let's just go straight for the fascists. Let's go explain what they believe. Now, fascism tends to believe that hierarchies are inherent. Some people are just better than other people. How they determine that depends from fascism to fascism. They also believe that violence is great. It's absolutely necessary in enforcing and making that hierarchy right. Okay? The next one down from there, if we're going, now we're at like 3 o'clock, we're going to see that the 6 and the 12 and the 3 and the 9 tend to have a lot of contention with one another. Down from fascism would be at this level, and I got to be careful what I'm doing with my hand. And I'm talking about fascism. I can get in trouble these days when you're doing with your hand. This is the quadrant that we would call anarchism, right? No, I'm sorry. This would be the quadrant over here that maybe actually describes Musk and folks like that, which is that hierarchies are absolutely valid. In fact, Musk believes himself to be a great showing of how hierarchies work, because he rose to the top, richest man in the world. But violence is not legitimate. So this is what they call anarcho-capitalism, sometimes gets called this name. So the belief is that there should be total freedoms for people. In fact, any curtailment of freedoms would be a curtailing of the great men's potential to make huge industry. Rockefeller would have felt this way too. So this is what I think we're kind of seeing play out a little bit in those extremists who have that point of view. Now, down here at 6 o'clock is the political ideology that is anarchism. So this would be complete opposite of fascism. There are no such things as hierarchies. All men are born completely free. Everyone is a blank slate entirely, and any wish to impose your will on another is invalid. You shouldn't do that. All people should be completely free. They would even go so far as to say that parents parenting their child is an imposition of the parent's will over the child's, and as such shouldn't be done, which is how I know they've never parented before. So that's a hard one for me to get on board with. And then lastly, here at 9 o'clock would be like a Stalinist kind of thing going on, where, yeah, they agree with the anarchists that all men should be born free, there's no valid hierarchies, but that must be enforced through state power. That unless you have people with means of violence, unless you've got your revolution happening, none of that works. So those are, and everything else, every other bit of politics that you might believe in or that somebody else is somewhere on that scatter plot. I just talked about the most extreme versions. And the reason why I'm saying this is before we can even have a talk about violence, you have to be able to define violence from your point of view, right? So each of those various quadrants are going to say that violence itself is a different thing. Do you believe that physical violence is violence? I do. Do you believe that sexual violence is violence? I do. Do you believe that economic violence is violence? Some of you might not. That might be a step too far. There are other things that could constitute what violence is, that the definitions they get spongy based on where we're coming from. A definition of violence I like from the Bible is in our psalm today. It says, "Subject me not to the will of my foes, for they rise up against me, false witnesses breathing violence." When the will of one person is imposed over and against the will of another by force, I think that's the best definition for what violence is. Christians are we know this violence well. Throughout history, Christians have been the victims of violence, starting with Christ himself. Christians have at times been perpetrators of violence. We have done violence at state or empire scale against others. We have done violence of different sorts. What you will consider to be a statement of violence will differ depending on where you're coming from. And all of this is within the realm of us acting on our best behavior according to the things that we think are guiding principles. That guy that I told you at the beginning, John Howard Yoder, the anarchist, again, guy who believed no hierarchies, no valid cause for violence, well, I shouldn't have used him as an example. That guy's canceled because he did sexual violence against some women in his department. So that was a guy right there whose whole theory was predicated on this thing, and he couldn't even live up to his own standards. Human beings have a very contentious relationship with violence. Here's the thing. When we're talking about what should we do, there's lots of room for this debate. I hope this discussion continues at your dinner tables or continues in your living room. You talk to others about what do you think is valid and all of this. What should we do is a different question, however, than what we receive from God. The vision we receive from God is that one that I preached to the kids just a second ago, about a world at peace. Do you know what Jerusalem means? City of peace, city of shalom, Jerusalem. That's what the salam is doing in there. How do we get from here to there? How do we get to a world that is peaceful at its very core? Not through humans, not through any way that we have of fixing our problems, because we appear to rely on violence to fix even violent problems. It's only through something that I would call anti-violence, and that would be the resurrection of God. The power of God, not just to say non-violence, to say no to doing it, but literally to reverse it, to put people and lives back together, to fix communities such that they were better than they were before they were broken. I'll tell you that this is oftentimes where my faith is the hardest. This is where I have the hardest time. Seeing a fractured world and living in a fractured world and knowing and having seen violence and just what violence can do to families, violence of any sort, seeing what it can do to people, and imagining how it could ever be undone. And yet, that is precisely what we're promised. Jesus will go to the city of peace in 3 days. And in his 3 days there, he will undergo violence. But in his time there, he will also give us anti-violence. He will give us peace. He will show us what it's like if we can have faith in him. Amen.